Hey, Alessandro. We see each other backstage, like holding up our mugs. And
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Great. So, everyone, welcome to hashtag Innovation Coffee, Arm Innovation Coffee. Very exciting episode. And you may have noticed that in this episode, I'm doing the introductions. Thank you, Alessandro. Yeah. So, in this episode, we have a very fun lineup prepared for you. We're going to be meeting with Ciira Maina, who is, I'm reading some notes over here, co-organizer of Data Science Africa, also one of our esteemed ARM innovators, and lecturer at Dedin Kimathi University of Technology. That's going to be the first half of the episode. The second half of the episode, we're going to be speaking with Alasdair Davies, who is fellow at Shuttleworth Foundation and the founder of Adibata Initiative. So with these two guests, we have lots of really fun questions, cool things to go over, and of course, touching on some stuff with Arm DevSummit and how they're going to be involved. There'll be some technology and how do we use TinyML for good. So before we just dive into all of this stuff, real quickly, want to share the link for people who would like to check out last week's episode. I'm going to post the banner here, kind of keeping with this theme, bit.ly/Innovation Coffee 2. That'll take you right to last week's episode. Really fun one with David Tischler, another one of our ARM innovators who went over his workshop that will be happening at Arm DevSummit. So, Alessandro, I'm going to pass it back over to you now. I think that it's very important, right? So there might be some viewers on the call who hear TinyML for good. They might know, oh, ML means machine learning. But you've given some talks and you've done a lot of stuff with TinyML. So I think it would be best, like maybe you can provide that overview of what TinyML is before we start diving and talking more in depth about it. What do you think?
Absolutely. That sounds really good. I'm really excited for this episode. There's going to be these two amazing guests in a few minutes, and I'm really excited to talk to them and hear what they've been doing. But before we dive into that, as Robert said, I wanted to just give a short introduction of what TinyML is. So for all of you that know machine learning and or embedded, this is basically the coming together of machine learning and embedded, right? And the whole idea here is that TinyML is basically a way of doing machine learning on really constrained devices. What's really interesting is that, in recent years, there's been a lot of developments around how machine learning models could be condensed to actually fit on a really small device, right? And this is kind of what TinyML is how do we fit complicated neural network models on a really tiny constrained device? What's cool is that, in the past, when people thought about machine learning, they've always thought about like these big servers, big GPUs, and that's still true, right? That's still valid for a lot of use cases. But in a lot of cases, actually, what that is used for, that kind of hardware is used for, is actually for training. So machine learning is really kind of is comprised of two different parts. The first one is the training part, and that's basically about, you have this mathematical model that you want to train so that it can replicate and can give you answers based on real sensor data. So the machine learning model gets trained usually on a big computer in a big cloud somewhere, and then what's interesting is that you could get this mathematical model, and then you can use it to perform inference. And what inference is actually is performing some calculations that allow you to actually get an answer on based on the model that you have on real data, and actually be able to classify real data to give you the answers that you want, basically. So what's interesting is that now this model can be ported to run on really constrained devices, embedded devices, such as anywhere from Raspberry Pi, the type of Raspberry Pi type devices, to actually microcontrollers. So all the way down to Cortex-Ms, so real microcontrollers, really constrained devices with a few K of RAM, and like not really performant as a Raspberry Pi, but still able to do machine learning inference on device. So this is what, this in a few words is what machine learning on embedded devices is. And now we're going to have two experts actually in data science and embedded, and we're going to speak to them about how they've used it and why they've used it. So without further ado, I've talked enough. Now it's time to actually introduce our first guest. So as Robert said, Shira Maina is one of our ARM innovators and an amazing guest to have on this show. Shira, welcome.
Hi. How are you doing?
Hello.
How is everyone?
Hi, Shira.
Awesome.
Did you bring a cup of coffee or tea or anything?
Yeah. We
All right.
have a cup of coffee.
Cheers.
And I also have this, which is coffee from my university. We actually grow coffee and pack it, and so that's a little something.
Amazing.
I think I need a bag of that.
And it smells great.
Oh my goodness!
Oh.
It smells like innovation.
Yeah, it smells like ideas.
Cool. So it's really good to have you on the show, and I've been waiting for this moment. Actually, I've said to you a couple of times we need to do this, and I'm excited to finally have you on the show. So first of all, before diving into the technical details, let's talk about your background and how you got to co-founding and co-hosting now Data Science Africa, right? Like what brought you to that point and all the great stuff that you've been doing lately? What brought you to this?
Well, how far do you want to go? I was born in Kenya, Nairobi. I was born and bred there. I went for university. I went to the University of Nairobi. So that's where really my love for technology, tinkering with electronics, and really now took an upward tick, really up a gear. So I studied at University of Nairobi in Kenya, and then decided I really wanted to venture out. I had a lot of wanderlust, and went to study at Drexel in Philadelphia. So I studied there for 4 years, and then there I did my PhD in signal processing. So I really love this idea of collecting signals, tinkering them, and doing things like speech recognition, speech processing. So that's what I did for 4 years at Drexel. After that was really sparked by my interactions with a lot of professors at the University of Nairobi. So I took it to America, stayed there a little bit. Then I think I was still very restless. I went to the University of Sheffield in the UK for another 2 years. At that time, I was doing computational biology. So we were tinkering with data from, I don't know if you've heard of high throughput experiments where they sequence DNA, etc. So it's really interesting. So to try and uncover what's happening in the body. So after that, I came back home. I came back to Kenya in 2013. So that really, when I came back now to really my rural home, my ancestral home, which is in Nyeri. So I'm not in a big city. And there I'm a lecturer teaching a group of very good students. And that also led me to start with a bunch of colleagues, this Data Science Africa organization, which does capacity building in data science, machine learning, IoT, all the interesting technologies out there. And we're trying to solve problems that are relevant to us in our context. So that's where I'm at now. That's my 1 minute, I think, version of my story.
Very well done. I mean, that was
Right.
You condensed a lot in 1 minute. So it's usually people that have less to say actually go on for longer. So you did really well. So it's really cool.
Comes from being an engineer.
Yes.
Oh, real quick, if I can actually, Shira, you said you did digital signal processing for master's or for doctorate?
During my doctorate, yeah, we were doing some stuff with speech.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I also studied digital signal processing. That was my emphasis. So I did electrical engineering, and I just love that stuff. It felt like a lot of paper engineering, but then when you started kind of getting into the code and creating filters and doing all that kind of stuff, it started getting more exciting. Haven't touched it since, but I definitely had a big passion for it.
But everything you deal with is a signal, so you touch it every day.
Analog and digital. Yeah. No,
cool.
That's awesome.
So first thing I wanted to get, first question right away is, can you tell us more about your latest project? Because I think there's a lot to talk about.
Okay, so I have two really projects that I'm running concurrently. One is a bioacoustics project. We've been doing a lot of bioacoustics work in the Mount Kenya National Park. So what's this idea of bioacoustics? It goes back to my days as a signal processing guy. So if you want to monitor ecosystems in the wild, what you often do is you need experts to go and tell you what's happening, what animals exist, what are their population trends, etc. So my thing was, how can technology come in? And there's been quite a lot of work going on in just listening to what's happening in nature. So you collect acoustic signals and you use that to have a little window into what's happening in nature. So for example, if you have species like birds which vocalize a lot, you can monitor them, identify them, and then also use that data to track them and track their trends. So for example, if you used to hear a certain bird a lot and now you no longer hear it, that's your cue that something is happening in that ecosystem, maybe habitat destruction, and etc. So that ties in signal processing, machine learning, electronics, all in one, and TinyML, because you may want to not only collect the data but also process it out in the wild. Another thing we've been doing is collecting water resource monitoring. Is also quite interesting for us because water is a scarce resource. We all know with climate change what's happening. There are wildfires in various places, and water is, in Kenya is mostly arid. I live in a very in the central part of Kenya is a source of a lot of the water of the whole country. So we need to really monitor our rivers. So we've been developing IoT sensors with Lora, putting them out there so that we can track discharge and, say, maybe now we're not using our water resources as well as we could. So those are two projects I've been working on.
And I guess the follow-up question to that is, why is this an important? Why is it important to address this problem? What kind of impact do you expect it to have?
Well, I think the environment is the most important thing. Without if we damage it, we know what it does back to us. It'll kick us off the face of the earth. Really, if we are abusing and natural resources. So I think the main aim of the work we are doing is to try and just ensure that we have a handle on the balance between exploitation and conservation. So that you're not, for example, taking more than you should, and actually being able to tell using technology when you're actually going overboard and, for example, exploiting resources that we should be conserving. So that's why I think it's important. Other than the fact that it's cool tech.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to think like you, finding that balance. It reminds me of probably pretty silly, but it reminds me of Avatar. It's a really nice cartoon, but finding the balance.
Yeah, finding the balance is, I think it's something we all have to struggle with.
And what have been the major challenges for you to actually get this into deploy this really?
Well, they're nice, interesting. Well, the challenges are good because a lot of them are technical challenges. Like the good thing is now you have all these long-range, low-power, wide area networks, LP1s. You have a lot of sensors really shrinking. We've been at our lab. We fabricate our circuits, deploy them. So things like actually deploying something in the wild, you get incidences like damage. We had one of our deployments vandalized by a baboon. So those sort of things, then you have to go back to the drawing board, determine how your actual device will survive in the wild. Yeah, and then you get the data, and then maybe you thought it would be a nice clean data set. You still have to deal with noise. So a lot of our data in Kenya, June and July are pretty cold months, and our sensors are solar powered. You end up having very little useful data coming out of it. You have to deal with anomalies. interesting ML then again. So you need to solve problems in the software and writing code to detect anomalies, determine what the real signal is in your data. So that's. But I think it's fun. I hope my students will agree that they're enjoying the journey of looking at certain problems, developing the tech, actually going out into natural ecosystems. Our water deployment is at Olpajeta Conservancy. So you go there, you have to be escorted by rangers. You deploy the thing, you come back, it's not working, you go back. It's an actual real world deployment. So I think there could be challenges, but I think there's no way around them but to deal with them.
So Ciira, you touched on kind of these challenges with the environment and all this kind of stuff. Every region in the world kind of has their own, I guess, challenge when it comes to accessing and getting technologies. So I'm wondering kind of what type of challenges do you experience in Africa and the places that you deal with in getting the technologies that you need to actually perform the job that you're trying to do?
Well, there are some challenges in the supply chain of like sensors, components. But I think the world has, until COVID hit, supply chains were pretty robust and you could get whatever you wanted, barring custom issues, slight delays like that. But now things have slowed down a little bit. But some of them are related to things like that, cost, and also getting, like we try to etch our circuit. So this, I don't know if you can see it, but so my students etch this, and I mean, we would like to go like do surface mounted tech, as opposed to through hole components. That requires a little bit more sophistication than we have right now at our disposal. But everything is a journey, and I believe moving from where we are now to that is not insurmountable. So those are the sort of challenges we have. I don't know how different they are from other parts of the world, but yeah, I guess I can't. Nothing is insurmountable. None of these problems is insurmountable.
It's always really inspiring talking to you because it's like I think we've got in the UK we've got different challenges, right? Definitely not finding components and finding ways of creating circuit boards, right? So it's interesting the level of challenges, right? And it's always interesting to hear from you how much you get done and how much you do with these kind of basic challenges, right? That in a place like the UK you don't have, right? And it's really cool. One thing that perhaps is less challenging is perhaps the software, right? Like, because I mean, the software is you could do it anywhere in the world. You just need a computer. So on that front, though, I'd be interested in hearing what are the challenges around actually deploying TinyML or just gathering data. What are your real challenges when it comes to data science?
I think you hit the nail right there. It's getting the data. Because there's no data science or machine learning without data. And if you want to solve problems like, for example, recognizing bird species in the forest, you have to go into the forest to get the data in the first place. And that's not non-trivial. So a lot of our time has been spent in expeditions to mount sensors. And that's the thing. So getting the data. And then when you come to the software end, I think I come from an engineering background, and unfortunately what I've seen is that when you're taught engineering, you're not taught software engineering. So developing robust software engineered systems, using nice good coding practice, so that sometimes when you end up trying to deploy a system, those things start to bite you. You need to go back and start really unlearning some bad habits you pick up when you're just hacking together code without software engineering practices. So things like that. But I think software is interesting because it ties the whole system together. You need to write the code to run on the embedded system. You need to write the code to display the data. You need to write the code to analyze, do the machine learning, etc. So the code is all through.
So we keep kind of talking about the code and the projects and the stuff that you're doing. Going out to the jungle and putting down sensors. I think that's just freaking awesome.
Right.
But I mean, when you're talking about Weir, like, who is this? Like, this is a group of you and some students. You have like a whole team. What is it? Who is it that's doing all this?
So my students are. I'm a teacher, so I teach students and bring them on board to do interesting projects. So there was a picture of my students. I believe maybe Alessandro can share that. Yeah. So I think
Bring it up.
I think this is so awesome. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so that's my students. There is Jared, I think on your right. Then Jason is the tallest guy in the middle there, and Gabriel Chiarie. So Gabriel has been working on a bioacoustics system running on the Raspberry Pi. So some auxiliary hardware to manage the solar, battery charging, intelligent turn-off, etc., and also the machine learning. So these are the people who do all the work.
When you're talking about building this stuff, I mean, I know, like, I've built a lot of solar systems or solar generators. Do these students actually build their own charge controllers? Like, do they build the circuit for the charge controller, or are you getting these like through a vendor? Are you buying the charge controller?
So it's a mix of both. So yeah, it's a mix of both. Sometimes we go the route of, okay, there's something on one of these vendors, but let's see if we can design it. Like the other day, we wanted to design a circuit to actually measure how much energy we were getting from the sun, and you could get some current sensors, etc. And I asked my student, okay, so how much does this thing cost? Okay, how much does just generating the circuit cost? So we quickly do it in our own lab and design the circuit, etch it, and deploy it. It's a bit of a mix of both.
Yeah, this is a huge deal in countries like India and Brazil, where when they're bringing in hardware or components, you can buy like a Raspberry Pi, right? $35. But by the time it gets to Brazil, they tack on 100% tax, the Raspberry Pi plus the shipping, all that tax. But if you bought the chip and you bought the components, all of the passive and active components, and then you built it locally, so you sourced everything and then built it locally, you come up with a better solution that's more affordable, of course, and more, I guess, scalable, right? So, I mean, definitely feel that. It's really cool, though, because building inverters and charge controllers, I imagine, has got to be just a blast for your students.
Yeah. And I think since right now we have the luxury of not needing to scale, so you can design one component. I mean, you want to scale, but I think part of my thing is I'm mainly involved in the education aspect. So I want to, demystify this building of electrical circuits and interesting systems. And so when you challenge your students and ask them, okay, you want to buy it off the store, okay, how much does it actually cost? How much do each of the components cost versus importing this thing, like you just said? And the answer is always go to the lab. You have all these guys have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. So I asked them, you have a bachelor's education, you can design this thing, so go do it. etch it.
I love the fact. So this is a data science. I read in the back, right? Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. So typically people think of data science as someone sitting in front of a computer and just like bashing it on like some Python code, right? Like just really like doing everything probably on a cloud somewhere, right? Where this is actually like here you're actually kind of getting students to look at the data acquisition, right? And like focusing on the data acquisition much more than the data science, because there is an issue, right, with gathering the data, as you were saying before. And it's quite interesting that you have to like take a step back almost, right?
Yeah, that's because, unfortunately, I mean, or fortunately, in our setup, you often have to do almost the entire pipeline of data science. So you have to start from the actual data acquisition. You don't have the luxury of having somebody else go and collect the data for you, and then you have a nice clean data set that you can run your favorite algorithm on. You really have to think, okay, I need the data. First, the problem is interesting. Okay, do you have the data? No, get the data. After you get the data, do the analysis, etc. So, yeah, so that's the situation we are in.
That said, there's a bunch of pictures here that I think we should show about like the actual. So you're talking about data collection, right? So
Right.
do you want to walk through the different pictures here that you have?
Yeah, maybe you can show the bioacoustics team picture. So that's one where that's a sensor actually called the audio moth. So we got an audio moth from the team at Oxford, and we were deploying it at our conservancy, collecting acoustic data. Then in the next picture, that's us at the Mount Kenya National Park. So we had gone to mount these acoustic sensors to collect audio data from the actual national park. So there you're going into dense forest, so we needed an armed guard. Then the next one, I think, is that's the river where we mount our acoustic our water monitoring sensors. That's a major river in Kenya called the Wasongiro, and that's within Olpajeta Conservancy. And I believe there is a tech lab, and I think you'll be talking a bit about wild labs later, and they're part of that whole setup. And I think the next one is a close-up of the deployment. So you'll see that cage right there. That's after our first one got vandalized by baboons. So the next deployment had to have that, and I think it's been safe and sound since May. It has a little solar panel at the top, and yeah, so we've been getting data from it.
So real quick, I want to be conscious of time because we do have Aleister waiting for the second half of the segment. But Shira, Alessandro and I have talked about this. We need to get you on for like a full hour to talk about pretty much everything that's going on, huh?
Okay.
I mean, yeah. So
I hope your audience agrees.
They do. There's even a question in the chat, so maybe we can finish this segment with that question, Alessandro. Is that okay?
Yeah, I've got one. I mean, one more question after that, but let's read that out. Actually, let's bring it up. Let me do that quickly.
There we go.
So Shira mentioned Lora networks briefly. Is remote connectivity a challenge for field programs, and how is it generally addressed?
Yeah, I mean, so you want me to jump in and answer that? I think so. It will connectivity is a challenge. So that's the answer to that. And LoRa networks and these other LP1 sort of solutions like Sigfox. The thing about them is that now you don't. First off, it's not as power hungry as GSM, for example. So it can actually work well on a deployment like the ones we do. But also the fact that it's really a network that's open. At least for LoRa, you don't have running costs for connectivity. So that's also a plus. And it's really a simple protocol to set up. So on these LoRa devices that we use.
Are you using the Things network as a network?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So we have a really at Olpajeta they have one. We mounted our own gateway actually, and it was able to give us quite good coverage there. So that's really a plus that you can actually go and set up your communication infrastructure. However, there are also challenges related to that because it's now having to do a lot, almost too much. You have to deal with developing the sensors, running the infrastructure, etc.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question, David, in the chat. But yeah.
I was also going to say that I think we asked the question of do you guys want Ciira the whole hour, and we've got a bunch of people. We agree. Oh,
sorry, I'm clear. I was clicking too. Sorry, Alessandro.
No, but I think some of those votes don't count. I won't mention names.
We should probably not count Louise, but other than Louise, everybody else, I don't think that you know them directly. So.
Okay.
Even I gave a smiley face.
All right. Yeah.
But that's cool. Well,
that's how you rig an election.
Uh-oh.
Anyways, I've got one last question. So there are a lot of people online, and there will be more people watching this afterwards. One question for me is, how can people help? You directly or Data Science Africa? Is there things that developers anywhere in the world could do or could contribute to? Do you have a platform or a way for people to contribute to your work?
Yeah, well, you can. I think you can give them my email, shira.maina@dkut.ac.ke. That's my email. However, the things that I really like are interaction. So, like my students could use, if you're an expert in developing circuits and you want to talk to them for an hour, and troubleshoot on circuits, deploying, software development, giving just interaction on a technical level would be great. I think that would be the most useful.
We should probably add. I don't know, Robert. We don't have a channel on Discord, right? We should probably add a channel on Discord where Shira and your students could talk to. We've got a Discord with
Discord alert.
With a lot of technical experts that potentially could help with challenges that you're having, right? So I think this could be a good way to connect, because I mean it's we need. I think the best way is to create to share a platform that people could use to connect, right? So maybe if you're happy to use Discord, maybe we could use that as a bridge.
We would love to have you on Discord.
Yeah, and you can also, I don't know how you did that magic, but you can also put my email down there if you can get it somehow.
I can get it in there, yeah. So what was your email again?
Maybe best to shira.maina, CIIRA.MAINA @dkut.ac.ke.
Oh, okay, that was a little fast.
Yeah, just copy it.
We'll put it in the description of the video for sure. Every single thing that we usually talk about, it ends up in the description. So people who are watching, check the description. You'll get access to that information. Yeah.
Okay. So with that, Shira, we're going to take you off for a few minutes, but then we'll bring you back on to for any final discussion, any final thoughts that you have. So don't leave us. Stay with us till the end. And we'll see you.
I'll finally get my chance to drink. Thanks.
Enjoy the green room, and feel free to hang out with the folks on YouTube as well. So you can, I put the link in our little private chat. You can go hang out with the folks in YouTube as well.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. And so with that, we should introduce our next guest. Actually, let me take Ciira off 1 second. That was cool, no?
That was awesome.
That was really interesting. I'm always amazed by the different challenges that that people have around the world, right? And it's cool to hear that Shira never gives up, right? Like, I mean, he's just full of resources, and I love that.
You would never, I mean, at least imagine your local area, right? And you say, okay, well, my challenges are sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. Maybe it rains every now and then. Baboon attacked his project. That's just amazing. I mean, how do you solve these other types of problems that your technology and the things that you're doing out in the world? Like, I mean, this is real everywhere. Every region has their own kind of challenges that they have to face, and this is it's really cool to hear. So,
and I think that's a good segue into our next guest. That's going to talk about polar bears and elephants, right? So I think we're going to talk with Aleister about a new set of challenges. So without further ado, let's bring in Aleister. Hello, Aleister.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Good.
We'll do the Brady Bunch thing. Hello, Aleister.
Awesome to have you on the show. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean, I could have stayed for the whole hour as well with Ciira, just talking away. I mean, great projects.
Yeah, it's really cool to see what he's doing, and I love the fact that he's bringing in the students, right? Like, it's not just about him doing things on his own, but it's also it's a community-led activity, right? I really like that. So I mean, Robert,
please, no, please. We didn't do our special signal.
No, I mean, I just wanted to hear from Aleister, from you. Like, what's your background? How did you get to do all the amazing stuff that you're doing? And then we'll get into the projects, in a couple of minutes. But yeah, first of all, like a bit of background on yourself would be super interesting, actually.
Yeah, well, actually, just watching that presentation then from Ciira, a really cool story to share. So let me just intro myself. But I'm Alasdair Davies. I spent about 13 years at the Zoological Society of London, so London Zoo, as a conservation technologist. So it was my job there to develop tools for the field, for scientists to go out, investigate conservation challenges, and use all that data to come up with policy changes and make a difference in the field. And then about 3 years ago, I got a Shuttleworth Fellowship. And the Shuttleworth Foundation is basically Mark Shuttleworth, so the guy behind Canonical and Ubuntu. And that Shuttleworth Fellowship gave me the opportunity to specifically go out into the world and unlock access to open source hardware and software. And you know, in the presentation you just saw, there was mention of a device called the Audio Moth, little passive acoustic recorder. One of the things that fellowship did was get the Audio Moth onto a GroupGets platform so we could bring down the cost and get the crowd to buy it. And I was sitting there watching it thinking, holy crap, it's like, I just saw the device in action in the field. We're connected already. So it's so good to see that a moment ago.
Did you actually use GroupGets? I love that platform, by the way.
It was the first. Yeah, we used GroupGets because it was sitting there ready for us to just, scales of economy, right? Get it out there. And AudioMoth is by far one of the biggest, products on GroupGets, along with the fluoleptons that they sell. And it's been a dream product for a lot of people. So I just worked with the Open Acoustic Devices team to enable that. So did all of like logistical work behind it through the organization I set up with the fellowship. So good to see it today. I didn't even have to tell him to say anything. It was just, it's organic. He's using that tech in the field. Brilliant.
Awesome. I mean, that's a really interesting story. It's cool to see how some of the things you work on actually have an effect, and actually are useful in the field. So that's super cool. With that, actually, I'm interested about, I know that you do some quite interesting field work yourself. So I'm interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm here to talk to you about polar bears and elephants because a few years ago, I got asked to try and detect the presence of a polar bear and an elephant in the field. And that's a big challenge when you think about how are you going to do that on a constrained device. So when you're thinking about, as you said, TinyML, what's the microcontroller you're going to use? How are you going to create a device which is incredibly energy efficient that you can put out into the field, detect these animals confidently, generate an alert, send that over a Lora network, as you saw, we're talking about that again, or over cellular, and how are you going to do that in low cost? So I've kind of got a few goodies here to kind of hold up to the camera and show you. So I want to take you on a journey of how I went about that. And this is running up to the Dev Summit, the Arm DevSummit, where I'll go more into what we've got from the models that we've created. But today it's kind of like a nice coffee chat. And I've got my coffee with an animal on it. There you go. Just to kind of, give everyone on the call an overview. Nice. An overview of what we got up to. So I'm just going to share something on my screen here. Let's get this. Okay.
So
can you bring that onto the thing?
Yeah, while you do that, I was just going to say quickly that we probably forgot to mention it before, but both Shira and Aleister actually got talks at DevSummit, Arm DevSummit. So if you haven't done so already, you might want to check it out, devsummit.arm.com. So as Aleister was saying, this is just a kind of intro because we don't want to give too much away about what you're going to talk about at DevSummit. But, I think, don't show everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, exciting. There we go.
Okay. Right. So if anyone watching this is wondering what you're looking at here, you're looking at the output of a thermopile. So you may have, your garage sensors and so on when they detect your presence and they turn on a light or a camera when you're coming up to park your car or get into your house. That is a passive infrared sensor. And it's 1 or 0, right? It's digital. So it's like it detects the presence, it detects that change in infrared and it says yes or no. A thermopile is basically an array of infrared sensors, so you can get a pixel-based response. Now I'm holding one up here. You can see it on my screen here. So there's my little breakout. And I'm just holding, thank you, I'm holding this up to see what I get. Now, when we first started this project, we wanted to look at, could we take these arrays of, say, 32 by 24 pixels, so very low bit rate arrays, and detect the presence of an animal? Now you can kind of see I'm waving my hand here, so you can see my hand, right? So you can tell vaguely in this here that there's a presence of a human, there's a hand, but it doesn't have the fidelity you need to get enough data from the scene. So we started playing with thermopiles because they were very low cost entry level devices. Then we looked at higher resolution thermopiles, which can go quite high now, to try and break out and see if we could detect animals. But we're not quite there yet with that tech. And when we talk about innovation, for me, it's also about kind of riding that innovation coattail and getting access to tech like this, but realizing too that you may not be there yet. You may have to use other devices, but keep an eye on what's evolving and build systems that allow you to take thermopile sensors and other sensors which are low cost and use them in the future as they get better and better and better. But we had to kind of up the rate a little bit and look at other thermal technologies. So to show you what we did next, I'm just going to share another screen here with you. Let's see if we can find this.
So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a question while you do that. Oh, I'm seeing the. I'll take it up. I'll put it up in a second. But
yeah.
So you talked about the sensor. So again, like data collection, right? Like this, as usual, when we talk about things out in the field, you have to collect data, right? Like you don't have that data set that you can use to like train your model. But what brought you to actually even before this? What brought you to thinking of using machine learning? I mean, we're talking about constrained devices. Why not use classical methods to like put a threshold of once you see enough pixels turn red or whatever it is, there's a polar bear there. Like what brought you to thinking of introducing machine learning in this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we had to look at a solution which is incredibly low cost because this had to scale. Now, if you're talking about low cost, you're talking about things like, a Teensy board or an Arduino-based solution or even like a Pi Zero, right? Something that's very scalable. And as you constrain that down and you want to make these devices run for years in the field, then you're talking about very low power controllers where you're sipping a few microamps of power, you're waking up, doing that detection, and then going back to sleep. So machine learning gave us this ability to say, well, could we take very entry-level sensors which are cost efficient, use machine learning to train the system to do the detection, and skip out of that other world, which is sticking a big lead acid battery in the field with a 12 megapixel camera like an SLR, just continuously taking photos, or live streaming video. Then you're talking about NVIDIA Jetsons and so on, which you can't stick in the field because you're 11 watts of power before you get going. So we had to think about what could we do that would offer a low cost device. When we finish this challenge of saying, yes, we can detect these target animals, here's a device, and it's like, $50 with a lithium ion battery as well in a nice little kind of, injection molded package. That's why we had to look at TinyML, machine learning, and embedded devices.
Cool.
I'm sorry, real quick, you said so low cost would be like Teensy Arduino-esque, right? So you're talking the tens of dollars kind of thing?
Yeah, we wanted to initially look at like, a $50 entry-level device. I'll show you in a second when I share this video now, but we're a little bit higher than that because we changed how we sense the thermal world, and I'll show you why in a sec. But if we could get a device into the hands of communities which costs as little as that, then you're in the realm of scale, right? Because then it doesn't cost that much to put a device outside your paddy field or your hut when there's a herd of elephants coming across that just wakes you up and sends you a WhatsApp or whatever, saying you need to get out of bed. That's how those human-elephant conflicts become so dangerous, because often the elephants are already upon you. You wake up, it's too late. You're right in front of the elephant. You need to give people a sense of there's a problem, the elephants are approaching, get out there, make a warning, get the community safe, and then you save lives of both animals and people.
I want to take this to like kind of almost a consumer point of view. I mean, you could put this out on your patio, and I know obviously it's save lives. It's much better, right? It's much better used for good. But you could put this on your patio and track hummingbirds at your hummingbird feeder, or birds at your bird feeder, and say like, hey, ping me when this happens. And then you're like, oh, I can go check out the birds.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, exactly. And that ability to do that will come up in a few minutes as to how where we are now in terms of making that accessible. So you could take this hardware and retrain models yourself to do that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. Shall we bring up the cool thing?
Bring this up. Yeah. So this is a polar bear, right? I'm going to press play here and see if it's going to work for you. There you go. Now, when we first started this project, we got told you can't use thermal with polar bears. They're invisible. because they're so well insulated as animals. But as you can see, thermal works with polar bears. They can't cheat the system. The technology is good enough to detect their presence. So I'll pause it there. Now, look at the difference in a polar bear image there compared to the thermopile. And what you're looking at here is a microbolometer. A microbolometer is the sensor type used in the FLIR systems and the higher end thermal camera systems. But this is using technology that is still affordable, because we're looking at, say, like a lepton sensor, which is about $180, but we can get better resolution footage. Now, you can see here that you can really, capture the animal itself. You can then train a more efficient model because you've got a better data set to work with. And we started putting out, again, Raspberry Pi based systems at ZSL Whipsnade Zoo, where the elephants were. We put them on time lapse. We used some of the kind of pure thermal breakout boards. And we started capturing these these images, these data sets of elephants, of Asian elephants. And we're doing the same for polar bears. So we're using it to form our data set, which we can then train and get our model. And then we're compressing that down into, say, TensorFlow Lite scenarios, where we're pushing that to the end device and then trying to get that model down in size to fit a microcontroller. That's the kind of process we're taking. It's thermal image collection, the labeling of it, the training, and then pushing it out to the device, which is going to run in the field. And people often say to us, well, why don't you just take all the cameras that you use, right, to do the initial collection? But it's still too high power. People often talk about, like, the Raspberry Pi being the answer, and I'm a huge believer in it. But it's a lot of, milliamps of power when you think about, a Pi 3 sitting in the field. You just don't have the control and the low-powered environment to the degree we need to solve that problem. So we have to really then push down.
Aleister, I want to kind of touch on the environment in this case, right? So, you're in Antarctica, right? That's kind of the region we're talking about. In Antarctica, isn't it like daytime all the time? Isn't there sun all the time? Wouldn't it be also feasible to, say, amp up the compute power, put some more things on there, and even add to the ability of what this device could do while simultaneously taking advantage of, the 24-hour sunlight?
Yeah. Well, we're actually up in Greenland in the Arctic.
Oh, okay.
So the polar bears are up there. But you're right. We actually went up to Greenland to a little town called the Tokatumit, which is one of the most remote locations on the planet. It's a tiny little settlement there. You can only get there by helicopter. We went to test some of this equipment up there, and we took a 50-watt solar panel. And you're exactly right. That solar panel's efficiency goes down so much when you're in the winter months that it becomes useless. But what you're looking at there then is exactly kind of like as Ciira said as well. Where is that middle ground between just putting in what you need? So, big lead acid batteries, burying it in the ground, giving yourself all the power you need to run for a year, giving it, putting in a streaming camera and some, CPU grunt behind it, versus something which is kind of, handheld, there's 100 in the box, you just give them out to the community and it does the job. A lot of my work is about that middle ground as to when do you make that decision to invest the money and go for something fixed, which is infrastructure based and just does the job, but you put a lot of cost in, to what can we give out, which is more community orientated, that you can retrain. And on that, actually, one exciting thing is this little device. I mean, I'll put it, people in the chat may know this, right? OpenMV, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that. OpenMV are doing really exciting stuff. And you can see how I've actually got the lepton hat on. So this allows me to put a lepton core, thermal core in. And what's really exciting about this is there's another startup called Edge Impulse that you're all going to hear about that allow you to train your models on the OpenMV device in a really nice IDE. So really easy for you to kind of get your data, train it, label it, get it running on a microcontroller on an Arm device, and do that in a much more efficient way than having to go through the whole kind of tool chain of learning that world yourself. And I'm really excited now about what this little device is going to do in the thermal world, just as you saw with those polar bears, with the training it offers, and working with like tools like Edge Impulse. We think we're going to be able to make this more, I would say, open, because anyone can just go and get an Edge Impulse account and retrain the model, right? Like you said with your hummingbirds, just go in and start using the tool and go retrain it for something which matters to you. For me, it's the detection of animals which are in human-wildlife conflict. So it works for everybody.
So I've got two things. The first one actually you just touched on is actually the fact. So I was going to ask you actually, what is the kind of main objective, right? It sounds like for you, it's actually about human and animal conflicts, right? So it's not about, saving, I guess, like looking for endangered species, or I guess it's actually connected, right? Because elephants are also endangered species as polar bears. But I guess it's more about actually saving lives, human lives, because and animal lives actually, because there are actually tensions. And this is one of those other problems that you don't actually realize by living in the UK, right? Like you don't realize that these are kind of problems that happen, or things that are actually happening often, right? So how, do you have some numbers around like what is the frequency of encounters that are dangerous?
So in Nepal alone, over the last 3 years, there've been over 100 human deaths from human-elephant conflict. So it's a huge problem. And we know from the polar bear perspective, with the changing environment and the climate, there's more pressure on polar bears to enter human habitats. And it's often the smell of food. So rubbish tips, food in bins, seal skins. They can smell them from miles away. They move into a human territory. And again, you walk outside to go and, check your bin, put some food in it as a polar bear there. That's when the conflict happens. And if we were to say, hey, guys, here's a device, but it's $2,000, we're never going to scale, right? No community is going to be able to use that. If we say it's $50 and you can put it outside outside your door, and it'll actually text you if there's a polar bear there, brilliant. Then we're solving the problem. So this is exactly as you said. It's low-cost tech. It's open access machine learning. It's making that accessible to more people and having it community-based.
I just want to do a little plug here, because actually at Arm DevSummit, sorry, this is wrong. It's not this one. It's this one. We're actually going to have OpenMV. So Kwabena, one of the founders of OpenMV, actually give a workshop on how to use the OpenMV with an Arduino, with Edge Impulse. So all the great stuff that Aleister you just talked about, and then we're going to have a talk from you. I'll put that up. Actually, I've got this one up here. So we're going to have a talk from you as well, talking about all this great stuff that you're doing and more. Right? I guess to give people a bit of a bit more of an insight on what you're gonna touch on there. Can you share a bit more of like what is that gonna get into?
So we're going to share the actual data. So we're going to show you how good the models are at detecting elephants and polar bears, and go through some of the actual processes we used, how we tried to shrink the model down, which models work for us. So it's going to be much more software kind of focused, and a look at what we're going to do next in that world. So today was more of a kind of coffee chat about how we got there, and the summit's going to be about what we know now, how good it is, and what's coming next.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to watch it. So
I hope so.
Robert, are you going to watch it?
I hope so. I mean, we're all scheduled to be at help with certain sessions and workshops, but this was one of the ones I really wanted to see. So I want to see them all. I wish they didn't do overlaps. Like I wish it was all just straight go, and I'd sit there for 15 hours,
Cool. I'd say we bring Shira back in and we chat about, we got last 4 or 5 minutes of chat, and, Shira meet Aleister, Aleister meet Shira. Shira, I think you're muted.
Hey.
Still. You're still mute.
Yeah. That was very nice to hear about Aleister. Nice to hear.
Well, it's great hearing your talk too.
I think we got a question actually in the chat that's going to be popping up in just a second for Aleister. I'm actually kind of curious. We didn't hear much from Ciira. Ciira, you giving also a DevSummit talk or workshop?
Yeah, it's a talk.
Yeah,
so I'll be.
There you go. All right. You want to give us a little teaser?
Yeah, it'll be about, I mentioned the bioacoustics work. So we went into the forest, collected acoustic data. We actually have a web app where you can go and listen to some of the acoustic recordings we've collected over a number of years. And talking about developing the models, the machine learning models that we're trying to use to recognize this bird species. So that process, and then we still haven't shrunk them down to fit on TinyML, but that's where we're headed. So I'll be talking about that and the challenges. You get data and it's a bit messy. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah. So both have nice sessions at DevSummit. Gosh, I want to attend them all. It's going to be tough. So the question finally popped up. Do we want to take that one?
Yeah, let's take the question on the chat. So I'll bring it up. Here we go from David Walmart. Was that a flare lepton, Aleister? Help us for a moment. Held up for a moment. What is the range of the sensor you use?
Okay, so the first one I held up was not a lepton. That was the thermopile. The OpenMV had a lepton carrier, so it's pin compatible. You can put the 2.5 or the 3.5 in, and we use the lepton in our system. And the range, a lepton 3.5 has a resolution of about 120 by 160 pixels. You can see an elephant, and you can detect an elephant with a confidence of about 90% at a range of about 30 meters with that sensor. We found that even if you drop it down to the lepton 2.5, which is half the resolution, the model doesn't actually get that bad. Like, you don't have a confidence level shift that's quite large. It's still pretty good at detecting. But beyond that, 30, 40, 50 meters, it's tough with that sensor resolution. But of course, it's all about cost, right? I could put a 640 by 480 sensor in for $3,500 and woohoo. But we're looking at low cost entry level thermal. So we're constrained again. It's all about constraints. We have to look at what is the lowest cost thermal sensor, what's the lowest cost microcontroller, where's the middle ground, and then get that out to the masses. But that's what we use. We do use the leptons.
Cool. I really like the point you made. I think it was a few minutes ago when you said it's not about just putting one device out there. It's about taking 100 of them, in a case and being able to basically distribute these in a bigger range, right? Or
yeah. Community purchasing too, I think is really exciting. Yeah. As you said, right? That tax issue when you import electronics and you shift them around. If we can get communities to aggregate and buy together, and then have developers iterate through that device, right? So we're editing that, we're hacking it, we're looking at releasing more open source software for it. Brilliant. And then both Ciira and I benefit because we're in the field and this team is there and we're lowering down cost and saving wildlife, which is the real reason we're all doing this.
Yeah, and one last question actually, because I think we talked about TinyML and the fact that Shira, you're saying how you're kind of moving towards that, right? And that's kind of the path you're taking as well. And what's interesting is we haven't really quantified the length that you want to keep your devices in the field for, right? So you've mentioned, Aleister, that you want to keep them out there for a long time, but what is that long time, right? Like, are we talking about, and what is the battery that you're running off to be able to do this?
Do you want to go first, Ciira?
Well, for me, we're looking for it to be, rugged enough that you can leave it out for a year without service, at least. And the devices we have, since the ones we have deployed so far are solar powered, so it can go for longer, until the thing just breaks down or is hacked by a baboon or something like that happens. But essentially, it's as long as right now we are testing things out to see how far we can go, but at least a year without maintenance.
Okay, makes sense. And you, Aleister?
So we use like a bank of 18650 lithium ions, and you can put them together in a pack. For us, it's difficult with getting really extended time ranges because the cores, when you wake them up, take a lot of power. So what we're trying to do is really limit the time the device is on and the time it's asleep. So if it's asleep and we're like consuming 20 milliamps of 20 microamps of power, but we only wake up for a few seconds, do the ML side of things, detect if the animal's there and shut down. We want to get to the kind of 3-4 months range before someone has to go back and change it. Now in India and Asia, solar panels, right? All that sun is going to charge us, and then we can burn a lot of that through the night. But again, in the Arctic, we can't do that in the winter months. So we have to be quite clever and again, look at those constraints and think about how do we get around all of those barriers? And there are so many, especially when it's negative 50 degrees C as well. Because those batteries are going to lose a lot of potential when it's that cold. As we know, lithium batteries don't do as well in the cold. So keeps me up at night trying to solve this challenge, that's for sure.
I think this is a nice way to end it, right? Like we talk about TinyML, and I think the thing that people probably have in mind is constraints, right? It's a constraint environment that you're working on, but it's also a constraint model that you're using and so on. But it's not because you're trying to be hard with yourself. It's because actually there are places where constraints are what you have, right? What you have to deal with. And actually, this is a great. I mean, it's actually an interesting engineering effort, right? To try and make things work in a constrained environment, right? So it's actually, to me, that's why I'm passionate about it, because it's all about how do we get this thing to work, something that we used to work in the cloud to now work on a CPU that costs $1, right? Basically, that's
256K RAM, right? It's like, where's my gigabytes of RAM gone? Okay, let's get them all to run. But, the different space, but that's why it's fascinating. But the community's really growing as well, right? There's so many people getting involved now. It's very exciting. The hardware is getting a lot of attention from Arm. So, the next few years are going to be really, really interesting.
I agree.
Yeah, I wish I was a student. just coming into the world of electronics right now.
But you're lucky because you can talk to students, right? So you can actually see what they're thinking and what ideas they have, right? So it's quite cool, actually.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm just gonna put this up, devsummit.arm.com. You can register for free, and both Shira and Aleister will actually be giving 2 talks, and then we'll have friends from OpenMV, Arduino, and Robert. Who else is going to be there?
Oh, we have folks from AWS, Rancher, VMware. I mean, the list goes on. I definitely suggest checking out the agenda. There's like 200 speakers, hundreds of sessions. Maybe I'm over speaking there. 100 sessions, tons of workshops, community sessions, lots of good stuff.
So yeah, it was, guys, it was an awesome show. I think, I really enjoyed talking to you guys, both of you. And, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience? Shira, you go first.
Yeah, well, I think these are exciting times for tech. It's important to try and, use this to really solve really important problems. I mean, important is relative, important to you. I think let's go out there and build stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say the same. Everything I do is open source hardware, open source software. So it means you can get involved. So if you're watching these talks and you think, I really want to get stuck in and help, you can, right? That's what it's all about in this space. So check out wildlabs.net, which is the community that I'm a part of, where we all hang out in the conservation tech space, and then Arabada as well. Check that out, and I would be happy to see if we can get you involved in this.
That's the wildlabs.net, by the way, down there. And thank you guys. Thank you again for taking the time and talking to us and sharing all the amazing work you're doing. And thank you for participating in Dev Summit as well. So hopefully, I'll get to learn more about what you're doing. And
Great.
again,
thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to meet you, Aleister.
You too. We're going to work together, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Last reminder here, and as well, thank you, Shira. Thank you, Alasdair. Last reminder, everything you've heard today, we're going to consolidate all the resources. Make sure you check the description. If you haven't liked the video, if you haven't subscribed to ARM Software Developers yet, make sure you click that subscribe button. Alessandro, we'll be back next week. Do we have an agenda item, or do we have our speaker yet? We want to kind of give a teaser there.
I think we should just leave it. We'll be tweeting about it. So watch this space.
Excellent. Yeah, and thank you everyone who joined. I think that's also an important mention. Thank you to all the viewers and everyone in the chat who participated.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.